going to have to live up to all of that now. So, if you have any questions, you can just email me or tweet me afterwards. Or ask it, yeah. So, I'll start at the very beginning. So, where Edge Riders came from is that in 2011, I was working for an institution called the Council of Europe. We were tasked with producing recommendations for 47 governments to deal with youth unemployment. It's a very tricky problem. Huge amounts of money have been thrown at trying to address this at all categories of workers, and still this problem persists. And when we were looking at the statistics, you see statistics like these. So NEETs means not in employment, education, or training. We found that what we were seeing was not just unemployment amongst young people, but a general loss of autonomy of the adult population. It's just that those of us who are young are sort of like canaries in the coal mine, but there seems to be a problem that concerns everyone. And the way that policy around, to do with youth or in general with recommendations was done was that you would basically have a bunch of tenured professors in a room. They'd talk to each other, they'd go away, and then they'd produce a document. So we were seeing that there were lots of the way that we were described was something that I didn't really recognize myself in. So many people would very easily fit into those categories that I saw were doing really interesting work. So this is one of the initiatives that's coming out of the community. It's called the Economy App. So in response to financial crisis, one of the ideas was, okay, why don't we move away from dealing with money? This person produces a network bartering algorithm to keep local economies going, even when access to liquidity is difficult or hard to come by. This is another member of a community who lives and works in the south of Italy, where they have serious problems with the mafia. And so what they did was develop the equivalent of a fair trade label for mafia-free business, which makes it easier for businesses to, in a public way, proclaim that they will not be supporting the racket, and it makes it easier for others to do it by showing that if you do it in this way, nobody will come out after you. And what's the logic here is that you make it easier for customers to support mafia-free businesses by showing, okay, these are the ones that do, these are the ones that don't. And one of the examples that also came out of the community was the Ant Monastery. Now this came out of a discussion that we were having about how difficult it was to find progressive money in the system. So if you want to do something that's meaningful and that addresses problems in a new way, it's very difficult to find money. And we started deconstructing what do we need money for? Well, it's 3 basic needs. It's basic needs like food and a roof over your head, and wanting to be, who do you want to be in the eyes of others, so a social role. And the third one was, what do you want to be able to get up, you have to have something to get up for in the morning, and where do you want to be able to see yourselves in 5 years? The idea was that, we built a physical infrastructure. There was that infrastructure in Europe around the 10th century, which was the monastic orders. There were centers of healing and learning, and they had a symbiotic relationship with the community around. So we said, let's just do it. And in 15 months, it's happened. We would just stare, and the doors open in February. Basically, a bunch of people in a room after talking to each other on the internet for a while. And we got the city involved, and they gave us the space. And so this is where it starts. Global warming, there's lots of socio-ecological systemic crises happening, and our societies have to respond. They have to come up with creative responses very, very quickly. But what does this mean? What are we trying to do? I want to, when trying to take on these huge challenges, what is it that we're trying to do? And I wanted to show you a piece by a German artist called Melian Kronemann called Lumibots. So Lumibots are robots that are, they both emit light trails and they react to them. And they're programmed with two simple rules, which is go where it's brighter and change direction on impact. I'll show you that when they've been going for a while, you start to see the emergence of complex, intricate patterns that can't be predicted and they can't be simulated. They can't be reproduced. And this is a concept that I think is very useful to become very, very familiar with, because the fact is that the outcomes of decisions are unpredictable even in theory. I like to think of these robots as, government agents, as individuals, as actors in society, and these patterns as the result of their interactions. So how do we affect change? Well, we thought you embed the institutions of power in different feedback loops with their environments, right? And so the response to this question of how to address youth unemployment was taken to a different level. We decided to do a massively collaborative, open exercise where we would be sharing our experiences of trying to navigate the contemporary situation with each other, peer to peer. How are we trying to make a living? How are we managing to build healthy relationships with ourselves, with others? How are we trying to exercise our sense of civic duty? Basically, how are we living? And out of those conversations, find patterns that are emerging and shared obstacles that we're coming across. And based on that, those conversations, we would determine policy recommendations. We'd see what are the problems we're coming across and how do we, all of us, think we should solve them. And the way we did this, the innovation was that we came up with a methodology to treat our online conversations as ethnographic data, as first-hand accounts. The selling point, I guess, was that ethnographic data, when it's done the normal way, is very, very expensive, because first you do interviews and then that's transcribed. It has to be put down in writing. And that costs something like €100 per hour of transcription. It's quite expensive. But we're communicating online, on an open platform, it's all there. And then we developed sophisticated methods for doing network analysis on the material so that we could weigh the significance of what was being said. So for example, if there were many people from Italy, we could weigh how representative their experiences were based on this fact, taking it into account. I don't want to get into I don't want to go on my Aspies rant about how we did this, but you're welcome to ask me later. And so the way we did this was through several things. Edgeriders is a platform, an online platform built from free software. This is a second iteration of the platform that was built by community volunteers. It's a number of social media accounts, and it's also a number of events, community learning events, the conferences, but they don't have a set agenda. Basically, people talk with each other online and decide what do we want to do? What do we want to learn? And a conference program emerges out of that. And it seems to be quite effective in both encouraging a sense of possibility, but also maybe fostering a sense of rigor in thinking. And so, out of these conversations, a number of insights, a number of points of important tension in our society started to emerge, at least for me, and which I think could really do with a lot more attention from cultural practitioners. One of which is the growing gap between the need to make a living and the need to make sense, to do something meaningful. To some people, that is maybe not harming others, right? To others, it might be just being able to make sense of the world that you're living in. Oh yes, I should probably also say, and this is quite important because, you know, with the systemic crisis or any when we're trying to solve these big challenges, at some point we get down to this basic conflict that determines whether certain, you know, solutions are adopted or not, is whether we can bridge that question of the making a living part. It's central to everything, and questions of work determine our whole existence. You know, how much of our time, our days, how much time do people spend at jobs that they hate or can't stand or that they feel bad about? It's quite a big deal. It defines your social identity, it's everything. Everything is defined in relation to work. So, really, these radicals, you know, these new ways of addressing old problems happen at the edge, right? And the people and the institutions with resources and the mandate to try to understand how to solve those problems are at the center. From the center, the edge looks stormy and quite messy and very difficult to understand. And what Edge Riders is doing is really trying to build an interface so that those two can have a meaningful conversation with each other. And I think this is, you know, the other challenge, the other key central point or point of tension that came out of this is I think this cartoon illustrates the point really, really well. So all of these first-hand accounts of people experimenting with new solutions to old problems, all the actors that we expected to be there, the funders, and you talk about social innovation as the big thing in Europe right now. We have funding, we have ad hoc legislation, we have incubators, we have accelerators, etc. So you have over 1,000 people talking with each other, people who do things, and you find that basically none had any positive interaction with any of these entities that are supposed to be supporting this. Why is that? Well, evaluators, and I guess it's the same for funding bodies, evaluators are accountable to the world as it looks now, to the status quo, whereas innovators, many of you here, are busy building the future in which the innovation lives. So the evaluators are accountable to the present and the future, and the innovators to the future. Perhaps they will never agree. You see, it wouldn't be such a problem if our societies were not slipping into authoritarianism. This is, I don't know, I guess most of you recognize Aaron, right? It was an article I remembered by Tim Wu, who pointed out that the harsh reaction towards the new generation's boundary crossers seems to be much higher than to the previous one. We have the rise of right-wing extremist movements all over Europe. Fascism, we have surveillance, spying. Where is this drive for authoritarianism coming from? And how do we actually, through cultural means, divert that? I think that is the second of the two points of social tension that I wanted to bring forward. Edge Riders, this way of working, this open way of working, so to be part of Edge Riders, all you needed is basically you need an email address, and it doesn't even need to be your primary one. You can participate anonymously. When we were dealing with the institution, this was a huge step forward, because the idea that you would have a space for democratic participation, which was open and unfiltered, and mainly unmoderated, was really frightening, because the way those institutions usually work is that you decide a priori who is to be part of that conversation, and then, you know, a lot of the times the agenda is set top down. But this way of working seems to be conducive towards others also taking that space and doing other things with it. So I was just in South Africa presenting Edge Riders, very weird event, and suddenly somebody's decided, oh, I want to build on this, I want to do a Pan-African Edge Riders presence, and people, I'm still sort of trying to get my head around what's going on, because every day I step in and the platform doesn't even look the same anymore, because that's the other thing, is that it's open source, so the community members are actually reshaping the tools that they're working with continuously. And so if we go back to the Monastery, I would say it's, you know, it comes back to the question that I had in mind when I said yes to the invitation to participate. I was asking, okay, when is art relevant? I'm going to ask you guys, like, somebody answer me. When is art relevant? What makes art relevant? Yeah, no, I'm not supposed to ask questions until later, but I don't care. So tell me, come on. This is what you do. When it moves. Okay, anything else? When is art relevant? When you can? When it makes you see the world differently. Okay. I think art is relevant when it aligns with larger social forces. They can be the forces for change or conservation. They can be the forces for authoritarianism or innovation. And we need change, and I think that's where all of these tendencies, this way of working, is coming out of the hacker scene. A lot of spaces where in European countries where we've had a state-funded, like state-funded support for the culture, there seems to be disincentivizing artists from being present in those spaces where these changes are happening. Like, if you know what's good for you, you're going to follow the tenure track, and that's sort of a path that's set out for you by the way incentives are shaped. But what we're seeing here is that there is a need for artists in these spaces. So the Monastery is different from a normal hacker space or co-living space in that it reappropriates a lot of cultural artifacts from the monastic space, rituals, even the visual language, clothes, habit. And we're seeing that it seems to be resonating with something in the mainstream. This is like a feature in Vanity Fair. It's completely bizarre. So we do a Twitter press conference, which is basically a bunch of people on the internet talking to each other. And I get rung up by The Guardian saying, hey, can you guys write an article about what the local government in the UK could learn from Edge Riders? Got Vanity Fair talking about the revolution of the monastic hackers. There's something going on there, and I would really like to see at least some of you in that space and helping to shape that conversation. Because you know what? Maybe we don't need to use old aesthetics. Maybe we can create our own. But that arises out of a conversation, and I'm not seeing nearly enough artists there. and the world needs you. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Nadia, for this last speech, last talk today. Very interesting, and it will